Hey there, welcome to Strong Towns Ask Strong Towns Anything. Glad to have you here. Thanks for watching and participating in the session. For all the folks that are here right now, I'm glad that you're here to take up these questions together. A couple of the pre-submitted questions that I think will sort of provide a bit of a theme for the conversation that follows. The first one here is from someone who said, hey, I'm a municipal government employee, and I feel like I need to be very discreet in what I can and cannot say publicly. Particularly in the lower ranks, it feels risky to even be moderately controversial or put your head out there. What methods have you used in your career to navigate sensitive conversations as a representative of the city without bending the knee or compromising one's principles? And related was another question from B. Hodson. So I tried to be discreet and not publicly identify anybody. But this person was wondering if, as a civil engineer, they could be provided some advice on things they could do to start down the right track of working, particularly with developers that care about creating great places. Their longer question that was submitted was just around the idea that, hey, I see bad projects with big dollars behind them, and they're the types of projects that my firm that I work for really wants to see go forward because they become a cash cow. They become the types of things that really help. And on the flip side, you can have local, lower level government employees, perhaps firefighters, that say, hey, I'm pretty sure we're able to get around some of these perceived obstacles, or I don't think we are as weak a force as it seems we are when sometimes the code or the standards are made plain to us. And so in this context, I would love to hear Richard, if you want to jump in, you've got some thoughts on it. But I wanted to actually ask Greg Sund as well. Greg, if you've got a moment, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, as a city administrator, some of the ways in which you fostered a sense of inquiry, curiosity, but also perhaps in your time, some of the strategies that you saw people have to use to cope with what it takes to find success, but also not get fired.
Hi. Took a little bit to all the different buttons I had to press to get it unmuted. I think it's really important for the city manager to create an open communication environment. Anytime that you rely only on the quote unquote experts to give you your opinion, you're not getting to all of the information you need to be making good decisions with you or the team of the management team. And so it's really good to have an open environment where people can object. And when they object to it, it doesn't mean that they're trying to tear a project apart. They're trying to get to the best answer to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And like I posted on there, name one city where a fire department has only been able to get within a few blocks of a fire and just simply couldn't get there.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard of that ever occurring. If a fire department or a fire truck needs to get somewhere, you will get them there, even if it takes front end loaders to get them there.
Yeah.
I think that's really a weak argument, but you need to be able to poke holes in that and not necessarily do it in public because you don't want to embarrass people, but have those conversations. And it's always good to have public be willing to talk to the city manager just to provide their concerns on various subjects. It doesn't pay to approach the city manager all upset and start screaming and yelling because you don't make any progress in any type of discussion that way.
Yeah.
And I know some people get frustrated and feel like that's their only way out. But bear in mind that communication throughout the entire organization isn't nearly as good as a lot of people would like it to be, including the city manager.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You'd like to think that those conversations are happening all the time, but oftentimes they don't. And so it's always good to be able to have that open door policy where you're taking input and really trying to find out what the issues are that are affecting a lot of things.
Yeah.
Just as a person in that position, I've received a lot of pushback when I tried to object to where a new planning code or zoning code was going, and it even turned into department heads complaining to the elected body because they didn't want me to object to anything.
Mm-hmm.
That's really bad communication. And it's something that you need to work on all the time and foster an environment where people are willing to object. And I think the city manager has to be able to lead that, even if it ends up costing him or her his job,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you have to be that person that's standing out in front of things, not just simply going along with what everyone else is saying.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I think there's, the effort to sort of have that work or organizational culture be stronger. I think this is where sometimes cross department teams can be quite useful, and being one of the first people to volunteer if there's any way to get onto that team, even letting managers know, like I'd love to be part of like working groups or things like that, provided that. Because that can sometimes be when it's like, all right, like we have a big topic, let's figure out like what are some of the current perspectives on this, and you're like, well, I've got a few over here, and perhaps have a role in that. Sometimes it can be depending on the scope of your work. I think that an underlooked area is often setting out contract requirements for consultants. So municipalities will often sort of put out the scope of their bid, and already they've pre-established many of the like features that they're wanting, and sometimes that's just a fairly like mundane sort of treated as a mundane task. Oh, just put together the request for proposals, and you've already set in motion this whole like narrowing of scope, narrowing of the opportunities to really get the right stuff. And so I think that can be a situation where certain engineering firms or consultants that are already on track to do work that we would be very critical of, they have sort of always found themselves just getting this pool of requests, and they just are the first to respond, or they're the only ones that are qualified to respond. That can be one of those areas where broadening the pool of potential applicants for those types of roles, if you do have to outsource it, I think is another part of it. I always appreciate that. I'll pass this on to T. Brown as well. The book by Cal Newport, "So Good They Can't Ignore You," is really good. It's a Steve Martin quote, and he talked about how he came up in comedy, and part of it was just by refining his own craft. He became so good that he couldn't be ignored, and that was his strategy, developing those rare or remarkable skills. And those are skills that people actually remark about. Tied to good character is one of the ways that you then become a useful part. And I'm reminded of what John Reuter did as a new council member. So a slightly different stance, but he said he didn't come in with like his 18 points of things that he needed to change in Sandpoint, Idaho. Instead, what he did is he had cue cards that basically were those 18 items. And when the problem emerged, we are knocking down a building right next to a bank because the bank wants to add a couple of tellers, but that's a historical building. Why the heck are we doing this? He could then say, well, the trouble that we've caused for ourselves could actually be alleviated if we adjusted our parking standards. And finding other opportunities like that, that might be one of those times where you look for the presenting problem. Man, we've just had another fatality on our streets. Can we consider a different approach? Crash Analysis Studio, hey, that there's some stuff that Strong Towns talks about that we could take into consideration. Richard, why don't you jump in as well? Because I know you asked about whether or not the instructions or guidelines are there. I know when I worked in the mayor's office, none of it was stated. It was all implied. But it's it's an important question. I think sometimes there can be codes of conduct around what you do with sensitive information. I've certainly benefited from a few. They weren't leaks so much as like tip-offs, but that's been useful, that the local conversation would get like fresh info. Or what Donna was doing, if for our council members, sending, as soon as you get the packet, sending some of that information on to key people in the community to say, hey, this is on the docket, is hugely valuable. I know that in Surrey, where I worked, the public didn't get information about the Monday night meeting until Monday afternoon, but the council members got it Friday evening. So Friday evening, that's at least time to mobilize. That's at least time for other people to get aware of what's going on. And so being willing to share that information, I think, is another way to help people in that regard. Greg?
And the other thing that's important to more or less communicate with the management team and with your elected officials is oftentimes the elected officials and the management people get the entire packet, but all they make available to the public is the agenda itself.
Right.
And
Yeah.
until you have the background on what that agenda issue is, you really don't have a basis for communicating what your concerns are.
Mhm.
And so I would strongly encourage you in your cities to ask the city manager and your elected officials to publish the entire packet
Yeah.
for people at the same time that it goes out to the council. So people are able to read it, develop intelligent comments and questions, and really be part of the process
Yeah.
rather than trying to catch up with it after
Yeah.
something starts going down the road too far.
Totally. Because that might be the thing that allows you to one sidestep all sorts of Freedom of Information Act requests. It also means that you encourage the type of behavior that we do want, which is informed discourse around these types of things. And yeah, there might be some bad apples that weaponize, hey, council is preparing this, but then at least that came before rather than afterwards as evidence of skullduggery or the contributing to the tropes that are out there about the conspiracies that are underfoot. Richard, go ahead.
Yeah. So everything Greg is offering is excellent, and and it's very ironic. I'm finding our little town, 33,000, is actually farther ahead in a lot of big towns. I'm not even going to go into that, but I've had to realign what I'm trying to focus on, because some of the big battles that big towns are fighting, we've already kind of got covered, at least enough to put them aside. In our town, both I'm on the county planning commission, but county and city, well, the county, there. Okay, I'm on an email list and it's public. You can just request to be on it. I get the packet along with the agenda 4 days ahead of time on Thursdays for beginning of the next week. I can go through all of the history, and as Greg mentions, that is just a trove of material, so that if something about your following, you can just add your sphere of how to approach stuff and what to bring up in public. But it also allows you to go back further in other agendas, and all of our material is archived, so you can go way back and go way deep. It's all public. It's all very quick to do. So definitely in your communities know about that, because when you're coming in from the outside, well, I often know I go to meetings where I know more than the council does. And it's just because not only I'm inquisitive, well, it probably, I also have the time, but I'm also inquisitive. And of course, but here's the deal. Then they go silent and you're going, well, but, and I want to just real quickly follow up, because I'm completely this week right now following up on this thing of when T. Brown talked about, we're not allowed to talk. And it's like really important for me. I would ask, well, around here, I'd like to know what's written and what's implied, because what I am really working on, if you don't know it, it's really good to figure out. We have a city manager council with a mayor, and mayor is chosen periodically from within the council. But the council is legislative, and that's very clear. Staff, even the city manager, is administrative. The council hires the city manager, and the administrative side, the staff, only make recommendations. That's a big deal to the council to then decide, vote on. However, we'll find that the council, after hiring the manager, are going, we'll do whatever the city manager wants. It's just like they're loyalists. It's like, talk about Washington, D.C. Well, it's their loyalists. Fortunately, not all of our council is that way. But I keep saying, how did this happen? How did the administrator become the one who basically influences everything, even though they don't have power? So make sure you figure. I'm trying to figure it out, and I'll stop. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Aaron, I want to put you on the spot if you're willing to. I know you work in municipal government. Maybe have some suggestions on ways to either you're looking deer in the headlights or willing to jump in, but just some thoughts on this, because I mean, there's always the moment where you think, why are we putting this priority in front of others? But there's also that opportunity to think, contribute new ideas in what's going on. Do you have any thoughts?
Goodness. Let me double check the question again, make sure I answer it. I recently went to city council as a resident. We had a LID on the street I live off of. And I was a little nervous because, I work for the city, but I'm a citizen too, you know. Um, and so that's been kind of where I've felt comfortable speaking so far is if the issue is directly impacting me.
Yeah.
It's hard because I feel like as an employee, the expectation is to share the talking points, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you have to figure out how to do that. Like with the public, I'm always, sharing the talking points and defending the decisions because I think that will lead to the best. Like I don't want as an employee cause any dysfunction, but internally, if I'm going to a parks coordination meeting or whatever, um, I think as long as your work culture is appropriate, it's fine to push back and
Mm-hmm.
say,
Mm-hmm.
"Hey, what about this?" Or have we considered this? And sometimes I think, especially as as a lower employee, like I'm low, but I also am involved in a lot of high projects. Like you can play the village idiot. Like I'm young, and so sometimes you're not always taken seriously, but I'll kind of use that on my advantage and play like the village idiot, right? And say,
Mm-hmm.
well, how does this work? Have we considered this? Like almost like seeking to understand and like kind of, you know, I don't have as much expertise maybe, even though I know a lot,
Right.
obviously. I kind of use that age to my advantage to kind of bring up questions and bring up
Yeah.
um, things with other staff members. But in terms of, publicly, I wouldn't say I have as much. I
Yeah.
try to be
Yeah.
careful. I still try to be careful because
Yeah.
it's hard. You know, and then when I took public administration classes in college, my professors made it clear sometimes when you're a public employee, you don't have as many rights as a normal citizen, and the courts have made that pretty clear. Like you have to remember you don't have as many First Amendment rights maybe as a regular citizen does. So
Yeah, that's a good point, and it does mean that you, I think, are reframing the idea that you're just bending the knee when you use talking points or things like this. It's like, well, no, it's not something that's core to your being, unless you're being asked to completely, be a champion for something that's completely at odds with your own views. But certainly, I know that one of the things I tried to do, there were a few times when I worked in the mayor's office that I didn't really like what I was being asked to sort of present to the public. And one of the things that I tried to do, and I think this would be for T. Brown as well, is say, here are some of your avenues for speaking up about this or presenting, so you're talking to a member of the public and to say, here are some of the more effective ways for you to provide input into this discussion. And that might mean definitely get in contact with not just council, but and I know that such and such council members, say Councillor Donna and Councillor, David, they're really in tune with these types of concerns that you're raising. And so if you're able to connect with them, that would mean a lot. That can be really useful. It can also mean like, hey, take a moment more. Instead of just signing that petition, let me share just a little bit how a petition is received versus how a letter is received. Letter is, 10x the amount of value that a petition signature is. So just take that extra little moment. And sometimes that can be that opportunity to say, I'd like to keep you in mind for a role on a local committee. Are you willing to do that? And they might say, oh, well, in order to do that, I'm going to take on some opportunities to like go in and learn more about this issue and be more present at it. The other thing I often recommend for all city staff is to encourage their people to try to show up more at public info sessions, because public info sessions can sometimes pre-color the way that the city staff believe the reception of the community is to some new idea or new approach. And those public info sessions on the budget or other things like that, it's like, well, the only people that showed up, all that they wanted was no more tax increases. Well, then that can always become, part of the data that does contribute to whether or not there is some movement here. So I think that's that's an important part of it. As to just what the needs in our place are. But Kip, if you're there, why don't we also pivot to that second one? I know you're not a civil engineer, but you do work in lots of different professions. Unless we lost Kip, I know he was mobile. Oh, there we go. No, let's see. Doing our best. But anybody else that either works as a civil engineer or sort of in a world where the well-being of your company sometimes depends on your ability to bring in dollars through projects that simultaneously can clash with values or the types of things that we really want to be seeing. Anybody have experience with that? Just to help answer Hudson's point.
Hey, Norm.
Yeah. Kip, jump in.
Yeah, I did. I did have an example because I worked for a civil engineering company in Burnaby, and we worked with the city of Richmond.
Yeah.
And if for those of you on the call that don't know, city of Richmond is a suburb that has about 250,000 people that live within 1 meter of sea level rise, and they'd planned on spending $1 billion to build this gigantic seawall to protect the infrastructure there. So I made a presentation to my coworkers to say, hey, maybe we should advise the city of Richmond to look at other alternatives, because the tax base right now can pay for $1 billion seawall. But what's to say the tax base in the next 30, 40, 50, 100 years is going to be continually pay for that seawall? Otherwise, it'll just become this gigantic, expensive infrastructure liability. And my boss and the client manager said, "Oh no, don't talk about that. We don't want to ruin our client relationship or speak ill of the city of Richmond or whatever their decisions are." So I definitely feel the pain when it comes to going against your heart when when basically our livelihood or the good of the company is trying to make profit and trying to make I guess our salary is dependent on us not knowing the full details or not making the best decisions.
Yeah. No, and as somebody that lives at sea level, I could definitely feel the nervousness that comes from the idea, like, are we committing ourselves to strategies that are going to be sustainable over the long term, and understanding those different elements. So yeah, appreciate that. I mean, that's a good example. And I think the idea that there are different strategies I would recommend, even something like Toastmasters can be useful at helping you to articulate in a fairly succinct way the core of the issue and some of the suggestions that you might have in ways that help to sort of buttress this sense, like, oh, you have a bit of authority or you speak with a bit of confidence, but also some insight into what's going on here. And that might look like, I'm willing to be a squeaky wheel on this question, or, this is not about us saving face or not saving face, but aren't we doing a service to our client if we're able to present to them like a fuller sort of scope of what it is that they're dealing with, or a better understanding of these core issues. I had a good friend that always took satisfaction as a mechanical engineer from the fact that he saved his company, and by extension, the client, 10x his salary each year. And so he was in oil and gas. And so every time that he was able to sort of value engineer, another system to work more efficiently, he could show like that is actually the thing that captures my value to the company. And I actually believe in strong towns, a lot of our approach to public engineering is less is more. Less street widths is going to save us money. Less elaborate sort of sewage drainage system or stormwater drainage systems is more if you can incorporate street trees into the process to improve that. There's so many elements like that can go a long ways. And so I do have another well, actually, we'll pick up Clayton's question later. I've got a question from Skeptic, but maybe let's pivot over to just the general group here. Does anybody have a question that you came today with that we can take up together? Oh, Kenneth, you are spotlighted. I will figure out how to get rid of that. You're looking good in the Vancouver. If anybody hasn't been to Vancouver and you need a place to go that is free, the public library there is, as a consequence of being surrounded by a lot of value, a lot of public wealth has been unlocked by the fact that there is so much private wealth within the vicinity. So thanks for the tour, Kenneth. Awesome.
Hey,
Any
I've got a question.
yeah, Michael, jump in.
Great, thank you. Hey, I live in Columbus, Georgia, and I'm working down the ink development, the class, and I'm thinking about taking the other classes in there. And I noticed on the ink development presentation that you guys, that ink development has worked in Columbus, Georgia. And I was wondering if anybody, could give me any insights on the Columbus, Georgia government. I'm a complete novice to strong towns, except that I've been watching your videos for about a year.
Cool.
But I have not gotten involved in the government or I've got a development project in Columbus. It's my house, but I would like to do more. Anyways, any thoughts about who I could contact at Strong Towns?
Anybody? Aaron, you're, I believe you are closest geographically. I have a suggestion, but anybody have contacts in Columbus, Georgia that surprisingly we can make that connection? Otherwise, what I'll do is I'll put you in touch. Monroe, Georgia, the planning director there is Brad Callender. It's about 140 miles away. So that's some distance, but he would probably have some insights into what I think it's a similar sized community. And Brad is doing some really awesome work. A lot of that work to, as the planning director, just tweak the zoning requirements, doing a lot of like deletion of existing clauses just to make things more streamlined, more simpler. He was showing me on his phone at the National Gathering, like all of the different types of small developments that were popping up in the community. And he said, they're so innocuous. They're hidden. They're often sort of off the main street, and people don't even notice. But we've added all of these additional homes within our community simply by removing many of the barricades that are there. And so I will I'm sure Brad would not mind if I shared his email address in the chat. So Michael, if you can see the chat, I'll drop that in.
I appreciate that.
Calendar.
Yeah, that'd be great. Macon is not too far away. And I actually have 2 projects in Cordele, Georgia, which is just south of Macon. So, yeah, I would love to talk to somebody that'd be way better than talking to somebody in Columbus that's kind of start with somebody in Macon that's excited.
Well,
yeah.
But I think it's a good point that like you want to get a lay of the land or a read of the situation even before you enter into the community. And there's the 2 approaches. One is like find a place and just work that area persistently, but as often is the case, you have to follow where the funds are. You have to follow where the clients or the the opportunities exist. What do you have in mind? Is it a handful of small developments, or what does that look like for you?
I've got a 3 apartment house here, and I've got 2 single family houses in Cordele. So that's the level that I've been working on. I've self-funded everything. It's not really the direction I'd like to go on. I'd love to do like a small, building of some sort, or more of a community building. So I would like to scale up. I'd like to get it to the next level. Cordele actually might be a great place, or someplace between Cordele and Macon might actually be a great place to do stuff like that. There's a lot of little towns. So yeah, I would. This would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. No, and Brad's amazing. Jonathan, jump in. Oh, I can't hear you. You're unmuted, but you might have to check your mic.
How's that? Is any audio coming through?
Yep.
Okay. Something that I was curious about that may be good actually for anyone new to Strong Towns or whatever have you to chime in on is that I'm working on a story for a local broadcaster about the rezoning project going on in Plattsburgh. And this stuff is very interesting to me, but I have known that anything of this, you could say Strong Towns universe, or we don't need vehicles as much as we do, or that adding lanes actually creates more congestion and it's very costly. Most people are bored to tears and they want to change the subject the second I say anything. I don't go into spiels and try to bore people. The second I bring up, it's like bringing up religion or politics at a mixed party. It's just like, well, change the subject immediately. So I'm thinking about like, what are the interesting things that get people hooked? And I thought maybe like, the Strode videos are on YouTube, but not just bikes, and the stuff in Texas that gets lots of views. I don't have those videography skills, but I'm just thinking about what topics or what angles interest people when they first come across these topics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, and by the way, this should be 30 minutes, so I I have to fill it up and not make it a just a pre-recorded college lecture.
Yeah. I mean, I think the challenge of just, oh, sorry, I'm distracted by Kip's question here. Yeah. So trying to create that opening for people to figure out like what's their pain point, what's the thing that they're struggling with, and that, you know, it sounds simplistic, but it just is that, like, waiting for that opportunity. When people say, you know, kids don't play outside these days, or, you know, there's some sort of social problem, and to say like, yeah, I mean, this in part was my path into this, was people don't seem to know their neighbors very well. Why is that happening? What is I think some of those concepts of like neighborliness, community, being there for each other, as well as that deep sense of, when we, I think at Strong Towns, some people have definitely come into this material because resilience is something that like lurks large, where they're like, yes, there are very real threats. And yes, we also have to really grapple with like not just the immediate sort of needs that we face, but also what are the long-term like obligations that we've come up to. And my depressing thought of the day is that because we've made things so poor, so bleak, you know, in a sense, we've degraded the soil of our community so fully. Right now, we're seeing that like the long-term consequences of that are becoming bleaker and bleaker. And so, to revitalize, you know, this is where I actually think strong towns, we need strong agriculture as well, because there's so many overlaps between what it is to like deplete the local conditions in the quest for constant growth, or the quest for at minimum just like a continuation of the exact same pattern, this sort of monocropping that pops up, and then the ways in which that has now led to like pretty degraded landscapes in a lot of our places. So but I don't know. I mean, Richard, you seem like someone that often has conversations about this, but you probably have a few people that drown you out or tune you out. Anybody else have that experience? I know that's part of why I started working for Strongtown, so I could chat with more people that would want to chat about these things.
Well, I'll hang on, working my buttons here. There we go.
There you go.
Just in general, being tuned out. Yeah, it's fascinating to be, as I've mentioned before, to be talking to like the council or whichever group. You know, the city, county, and port. That's my coverage, and they're looking at you like they're deer, they're deers in your headlights, and it's like, am I not talking? Do they not hear me? You know, and so one of the things that you just start backing up and backing up and backing up. And I start testing. I start asking very subtle. They're not meant to be sneaky questions, but rather than come in with the hot topic, that doesn't work. You just start kind of testing to see where you can get buy-in from them or not, to say, are you alive? You know, and then I'm at the point now where basically I'm going to start asking questions of, can you answer me? Are you allowed? And this whole thing about rules and regs, are you allowed to talk to me? And I'm finding more and more locally, it's horrifying. What I'm finding out is that there's all this intimidation going on. And so it's like how to work around that. And I go back to my classic years ago. I actually got a letter from I was glad I had an email from the city manager that said, RL, you're aggravating staff, department heads. It had to do with, I was following a development. And I was just asking questions, logical questions about how and why. I wasn't criticizing exactly. And he said, you're aggravating staff. I did not take that personally. I started laughing to myself because I realized that the city was not training their staff to be able to handle input that wasn't sugar coated. And it's like just serious discussions. And it was like, I'm not aggravating anybody. If they think they're taking it upon themselves, and that's their problem. Yeah. So,
yeah.
If that's kind of part of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. I mean, Jonathan, you think about communications. What advice do you have for other Strong Towns members?
I'm not in the best position for some of that, but something that I did observe, Norm, that you said earlier about agricultural practices. I hear you 100%. I know that your background, because of your background, you know about this, but that's an issue which has gone so tribal. Nobody wants any nuance. People have conspiracy theories about GMOs or whatever, and others say they're all great. It's like, no, look at the big picture. If you have, that's monoculture within monoculture. If every single plant is cloned, all the pesticides versus the soil. And right after that, I know what you're talking about, but I know that you've tried to explain that to 99% of people. They're just going to be like, change the subject. So I think that something that you said once that was helpful was to look for something that the person likely already knows. You had specifically mentioned, well, we already accept that we don't have a street or road connecting your house to every single destination you go to. You accept that sometimes you're going to be slowed down, you're going to have to go other ways. Where do we draw that line? And then that's a way to, okay, people can resonate with that idea versus some of the more abstract things. I think that's a good point. And as always, as we talked about today, having emotions, frustration, it's very tempting now that come through, and we really have to suppress that urge or just let it pass, because another sometimes thing, I remember Daniel Hagger was talking about one conversation, and I was thinking, oh God, this person, this woman at some meeting or whatever was, all the classic NIMBY-ish things, and like, oh, this person has to be corrected and this and that. And Daniel said, no, the response was, well, did you ever rent when you were younger? Yes. Now, if you were renting, would you wanted to live in a place like this right here? Good point. Yeah. So I think that's the struggle, is to connect some of the ideas to things that people know already. And what I think has been effective on a local level, what I've seen, is that when, say, a politician, not somebody who works for the city, but somebody who works for the owner, so to speak, has some vision. I want to do X for the city, and it's vague. That's where the expert can come in and say, oh, well, if you want to do this, I have the tools that have you accomplish one of your campaign promises. That sometimes is a better avenue to go in than, well, actually, you're wrong about that thing you said. Because it doesn't matter how polite you are, nobody wants to be corrected or have their illusions broken. So we have to tiptoe sometimes.
Yeah, and I think there's something really good about that approach of, even if you can, like, find people's campaign promises if they're an elected member, and say, you articulated like a compelling sort of goal to make our community the most livable within the region. One of the challenges that we have, and I'm sure you've experienced this, dear sir, is the fact that children out front of the elementary school are being threatened routinely by why I would take down the notch of the language. They're just not as safe as they could be. Have we ever really given serious thought to some of these sort of opportunities that are there? But it's hard. I think that we have that responsibility to do so, with that generosity of spirit, to say, I'm not the expert here, but I definitely want to learn. I want to, ask the questions. I think, Richard, at times there's a cultural sort of familiarity with the idea of like the inquisitorial question or the Socratic method. I know when I've had people that are like, well, I'm just employing the Socratic method on you. I'm like, I know, and it feels like you're pulling my skin off. Like, there can be this like lack of tolerance for the idea that, well, if you answer this question this way, then the next question obviously is this, and the next question, and that can start to really get under people's skin. But trying to identify, like, do we agree on some of the common sort of challenges here, and then building out from there. But I am mindful. We've got still about 10 minutes, so I'll pick up just a quick question that Clayton had asked, and bring in if anybody has related questions that you want to also pull up. But he just said, does Strong Towns have any proven methods for pressuring municipalities or states to make high priority fixes to Stroads with histories of bike and pedestrian fatalities? To answer that in the simplest form is the Crash Analysis Studio is our most sort of prominent way of attempting this. And I would say attempt because it is mixed in terms of the ways in which we have seen people do crash analysis studios And we've had some responses from public officials. We've certainly had responses from community members saying, okay, we now feel like we're empowered to be able to identify not only what caused or contributed to this fatality on our street or in the Strode environment, but also what are some of the concrete things that we can do. The real deep trouble is that we have seen very little uptake of very concrete quick fix suggestions that we've made, as well as the longer term recommendations that we've put in front of people. We've done, I think, over 20 sessions now. And that is in addition to the fact that we have a lot of other places where people of their own initiative have done a crash analysis studio. The reason we think that there is a lot of value in this, that I think is a form of pressure, is because it takes down the temperature around the question of, well, who was to blame, or how do we just get people to not be idiots on the road anymore? Instead, our method is very much, how can we clinically identify what are the core contributing factors to these crashes that are occurring? These are not accidents, because they're not just things that didn't happen or that happened without us having any concept that they might happen. No, this was something that happens with almost a routineness to it, and therefore we can definitely address it. Out of it, I do think that elements like ghost bikes to really highlight the fact that there is danger in this corridor, taking opportunity to have memorials present there. Those are all signs that something is wrong, but we also need to pair that with the recognition that sometimes municipalities are like, well, what's your solution? And the solutions are actually within reach. Frequently at key intersections, it's removing clutter, it's removing visual clutter in order to create greater clarity. It's doing those types of things to really designate where it is suitable for somebody to cross. If we determine that it is suitable for a person on foot to cross in an intersection, we're going to do everything we can do to make it suitable. So that's narrowing the crossing distance if there's any way for that to happen. That's reducing the curve radius at that key point. It's allowing for something like a leading pedestrian indicator, so that way the pedestrian gets an extra 2 to 3 seconds of traffic light time before the red light shifts to green on the cross street. The benefit of that is then people are already clear into the intersection, well on their way before the right turns or the left turns begin to happen. We know that these tools exist. We know that these things are within reach. And so that is, I think, one of the ways that we would say that is part of our method. I'm open to the discussion. Is it a proven method for pressuring municipalities to make the fixes happen? We are seeing some of that, but nowhere near sort of the magical utterance that just makes things happen. And perhaps that's because those types of proven methods that just get results are incompatible with the sense that trying to make these changes at the local level is murky. But the contrast, the idea that let's just adopt a federal standard to make this applicable everywhere, we also see to be incompatible, because even you look at the improvements that have been made to the streetscape and to our buildings and all of this because of the in the US Americans with Disabilities Act or other similar legislation, much of that has taken decades for its promise to be realized. And so we actually believe that a lot of that effort needs to be focused at the local level, because you can make a much more aggressive sort of rapid response, iterating on those types of things in order to have that happen. I do believe that the work that we're doing of saying this is not an accident. This is a continued feature of the design that we have designed our streets and roads for, that we will see pedestrian and cyclist fatalities here, is a way of waking people up to this. The other element that I'll add, and then invite other thoughts if anybody else wants to jump in, is actually, Danny, I might throw you in because you have had some very mature thoughts on this, is around the question of where do we assign sort of the temperature level and the idea of blame and shame. Our whole approach, we would say, is in contrast to a method of aggressive, moralizing sort of declarations, you evil people, or you bad people, you people that don't care about other people. We have tried to remove a lot of that temperature from the discussion. It's easy when I get worked up about the fact that people should care more about this, but I know that I actually have to be restrained and careful about this. In the same way that in a hospital, it doesn't help if there's been an adverse patient outcome, somebody has not gotten the medication they were supposed to get. It might feel righteous and good to blame that nurse or to blame that orderly. But actually, what we need to figure out is how do we create the system in which those types of occurrences don't happen again. And so, Danny, do you have any thoughts on pressuring municipalities to make priority fixes to roads with histories of fatalities? Because I know that's on your heart as well.
Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Good. I think one of the biggest things is also like understanding the structures that exist to actually like make changes, right? California is kind of particular where we've had some like history of like Caltrans basically having people from the inside like put pressure to not expand highways or to do certain ped bike improvements, or the fact that we really need to be doing this in routine resurfacing projects. And I feel very privileged because I have people in our Caltrans district that have been really pushing the boundaries in some of these quick build projects. Fast for Caltrans is like a year turnover, but that is still something. And then obviously, Caltrans staff meets with like our regional transportation planning association, which is sort of a conglomerate of the county, the incorporated cities, and Caltrans all working together. And so now I'm definitely at a point where pointing to what other groups are doing is getting like more response, more like, oh, we could do that. Like with in California, it's called the HM4 pilot safety pilot projects. And it's the idea that you get stuff like put in year turnover time, and they've been expanding that sort of toolbox. And well, now the county for us and the cities have a lot of that agency on themselves to be able to do these things, but they fall into that like, oh, we don't want to get sued sort of mentality. So now we're finally getting to a point where you can point to the other neighborhoods, the other cities that are doing this for themselves. Because that's oftentimes what I get is a lot of pushback. It's like, we can't do that, or we're at risk of being sued if we do that. And now we're finally getting to the point where there's a lot of good examples of other people doing it. So
Yeah.
Just pulling on, pay attention to what your neighbors are doing, learn the organizational structures within, wherever you live, because oftentimes like the city and county are outsourcing to a firm that has a board of directors that I sit on to like get a lot of funding for these public transportation projects. So
Yeah, Greg, jump in.
I've sat through quite a few of the sessions that you're talking about with reviewing accidents and fatalities. And one of the things that I don't think we mention enough is that if you go back to safety professionals in various professions, my experience years ago was in the mining profession. And they would put out numbers of how many near misses you have before you have one lost time injury, and how many lost time injuries you have before you have a fatality. And one of the problems I've always found to be an issue when it comes to engineering firms, engineers, and the state in general is all they count when it comes to issues that impact safety is fatalities.
Right.
We could get people educated to start looking at issues before they become fatalities, maybe we would have more intelligent decision making.
Mm-hmm.
Because once there's a fatality, you've already missed the entire ship. It went by a long time ago. Yeah. And one of the things that I think we've communicated very poorly to the public is when you have at an intersection a crossing light for pedestrians, they should never, ever assume that their right of way makes them safe.
Yeah.
And I think we've done a poor job in communicating that even if the light is in your favor, always be aware of what the traffic's doing, because they're not always paying attention to the pedestrians. And I think it's not blaming the pedestrians, it's educating them to act more intelligently and more safely in the way that they conduct themselves on city streets. Because I've I've found it very frustrating that we want people to cross at intersections, but there's so many things going on at an intersection that I honestly think it's more dangerous to cross at an intersection than it is to jaywalk in some cases.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I find I will cross, especially with my son, I'll cross mid street because then I'm only navigating a very, very simple arrangement. And, or even begin to sort of make your way down and then get that crossing or cross on the diagonal. But do that. I think there's a lot in that. Definitely want to highlight also what Jonathan, I really like what you've said here. And then we're going to wrap in a moment here. But that different audiences do need different messages, that culturally and for the masses, citizen deaths are key, but that city workers or engineers are often motivated by the financial impacts. And then this is one of those areas where I think some of the questions around the standards that we set for our streets really matter. And so Chuck's exercise of designating, going and mapping in your community, what are your roads and what are your streets? And then where you have stroads, identifying like, will we actually commit to this becoming a proper road that is a way of connecting productive places with other productive places? Or if we actually wanted this to be more of a street, a platform for building wealth, a platform for people to gather, to reside, to recreate, to do all of these things, then we're going to do a very different type of design work on it. And the benefit of doing that, coupled with the recognition that low-speed neighborhood streets do not actually need separation of users, but actually can have people using the streets together, can really help to say, like, no, we don't need to add sidewalks in all of our residential neighborhoods in order to allow for our places to be more secure. What we can do instead is begin to do a lot more targeted at every intersection. For example, if you neck down that street, so that each time that you enter onto that little neighborhood street, you've already from the beginning been exposed to the fact this is a neighborhood street. This requires a different type of driving habit. The benefit of that is then you can actually save a lot of the funds that would be necessary for a full rollout of separated infrastructure. But at the same time, anytime that we have a standard that says we have higher speed traffic moving through this area, to simply have the standard that says cyclists or people on a bicycle and people that are walking should not be in the clear zone, but need to be in a protected version of that clear zone, can be really relevant and really valuable. So on the side of the highway, we see this all the time where the cycling lane is inset, and then there's a barrier, and then there's whatever is in the ditch. Well, that's backwards. That barrier needs to be closer to the side of the road, and then there's the availability. We see this in residential road-like environments too, where yes, there's a barrier to prevent vehicles from plunging off into a ravine, for example. But for some reason, it's always on the outside, and the pedestrians are the ones that would be the first thing to stop the vehicle from plunging off the ravine or any other number of incidents like that. And so lots of good thoughts on there. Hopefully we'll have Clayton to be able to join us before long to take up the question with us as well. But as Danny points out in the chat, near misses are really powerful to glean locations from town halls, even public comments. I think you've even taken to tracking some of the ones that occur where people talk about a near miss on Facebook and say, hey, let's put that pin in the map. Let's really begin to document these things because it's often murky as to, well, was it a near miss or was it maybe my fault? The reality is often it's a consequence of, if I'm at the bowling alley and I had too many near misses with bowling balls, I may be sitting in the wrong spot. Like I may need to figure out like how to make sure that I'm not in that sort of a circumstance. And yet in this context, we sort of are just assuming that that is part of the landscape that we have here. So I think that there's a ton of value, dedicated citizens logging incidents of when people are taking note of this. I think is really powerful and important. With that, I will actually, if anybody does want to stay on, I'm going to have to step away in a moment here. But if anybody wants to, we can sort of like, I'll keep the stream open for just a little bit longer if anybody wants to follow up. But really, I'm grateful that you've taken time. You had time in your day to do all sorts of things on YouTube or anything else, but I'm glad you took some time for the conversation. Really appreciate you joining this session of Ask Strong Towns Anything.